We're filming on a modern lens today because my normal vintage lens that I film on is damaged, and I figured that this might be a good opportunity to fix it together, and we'll just have a nice conversation about delirium tremens. I'm not very good at multitasking. As I was falling asleep last night, I heard footsteps running down the hallway, footsteps at full speed, into my bedroom, through the closed door, and then it jabbed me in the ribs, just as I was falling asleep. And it jolted me awake. I assume whatever it was, it must have been one of those low blood pressure moments just as you're falling asleep. You know how sometimes you feel like you're falling, and that's usually caused by a sudden drop in blood pressure. But for a while afterwards, it really shook me up. It really made me panic, because it made me remember. That was a tactile hallucination in complete sobriety. The last time I experienced something like that was in the middle of severe alcohol withdrawal, which ultimately led to alcohol hallucinosis and delirium tremens. So that's what I want to talk about today. What happens immediately after delirium tremens? What is it like after the worst is over? What can you expect as you recover from that experience? I've talked about delirium tremens a lot on this channel, but there's still so much more that I have never covered, so much more to come out of me. And I'll get to all of it in time. But today, it's all about what happens immediately after delirium tremens. And I want to talk about that because it is impossibly hard to go back to a normal life after you've been through that. So, brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country. Without treatment, delirium tremens is fatal, somewhere around 40% of the time. But that 40%, those are old numbers, and perhaps I'll tell you where they came from in the next video, because that itself is an interesting story. But thanks to advances in modern medicine, about 85% of people survive delirium tremens. Needless to say, it is very much a medical emergency. 85% of people will survive, but surviving delirium tremens is only the beginning. Delirium tremens is such a traumatic and destabilizing condition, such a traumatic experience, that for a while, after I'd recovered, I was not entirely grateful that I had survived. I felt so bad for a while that I began to let myself wish that I had not survived. And it's important to chase those thoughts out. Gratitude, well, that will come in time. But for a time, maybe even a long time, things are not going to get better immediately. The actual recovery part is still going to be a long way off once you're out of the hospital. And you will carry your experience of delirium tremens with you like an injury for weeks, months, for the rest of your life, potentially. It makes you look at your life completely differently, as any brush with death does. Close calls always leave a footprint. But I don't think of any of my close calls with death as often as I do my experience with delirium tremens. I think about that several times a day. that inability to be willing to face the trauma and all of the psychological effects of going through delirium tremens, that can drive people straight back into the bottle as soon as they get out of the hospital. Some people will seek treatment just to get them through delirium tremens and then not be aware that there are a lot of consequences that also need to be dealt with. And that's so scary that some people will simply drink it away. It's understandable. But drinking your way out of that experience only assures another one. And it also assures that the next one will be worse, as mine were. Mine were increasingly, progressively more horrific, more destructive. Alcohol is not the easy option. There are no easy options in alcohol recovery. Everything is a difficult decision, but of all of the difficult decisions, continuing to drink after delirium tremens is by far the worst decision you can possibly make. So, I'll pull from my own history with delirium tremens to tell you what happens immediately after delirium tremens. And to do that, I'll kind of mash a couple of experiences together because I've been through it several times. Oh, before I do that, I often get asked by people who know a little bit about my story to write a book about my descent into alcoholism, about how alcohol took over my life. And the people who ask me that to write a book are often unaware that I already did. It's called Just Crazy Enough to Work: How to Fail on the Silk Road. And people ask me about this book because the story of my descent into alcoholism is kind of an interesting one. It's certainly unusual. My problem with alcohol really began to manifest seriously and dangerously while I was attempting a solo cycling trip halfway around the world. And I failed. And there were drugs and sex and alcohol and violence and jail and all of that sort of thing. It's all in here. So it's not my intention, it's never been my intention to sell you things on this channel. But I do have a few of these lying around. I have a box of author copies of the first print run. And everyone who's read it says it's really good. Well, not good is not the right word, but certainly memorable. If you would like one, they're currently on my site. It's a very limited number, I don't have many of them. But if you go to batcountry.co, you'll find it there. That's my website. And because there's such a small amount of them remaining, I'll add like a personalized message or something should you want one. So please forgive me shilling my own stuff on this YouTube channel. Like I said, it's not my intention to make money here or to sell you things, but at least it's not like some advert for a VPN or World of Tanks or something, right? Anyway, back to it. So, a ball bearing just fell out of this lens. That's a problem. After that round the world solo cycling trip ended, and I was finally back in the UK, I spent another 7 or 8 months alone, drinking about 1.5 litres of vodka or whiskey or gin every day. And then I had a series of, I was sober for a while, and then I had a series of stuttering kind of relapses, very serious ones, as I tried to get long-term sober. And I was in my apartment one night, after about 10 days of a binge. 10 days into a binge, I stopped drinking, and a couple of days later, I began to hear whispering and distant music. And having experienced this before, I had a feeling I was about to start hallucinating. And I did. I have a thing with disfigured faces in my hallucinations. I always see horribly disfigured faces, especially in the early parts of alcoholic hallucinosis or delirium tremens. And this particular time, I heard the whispering voices outside my apartment window on the 3rd floor. And when I glanced over, I saw faces lining up outside the window. And at that stage, I knew they were hallucinations. So I walked over to them, to confront my own hallucinations. They were missing parts of their faces, like had holes in their faces and parts of their jaw missing. And the wounds were not fresh. They were rotten, bits of flesh hanging off and that kind of thing. And as I approached, they faded away, and I was staring into the window at my own reflection. And then my face in the reflection began to become grotesque and disfigured. And I knew then that I had to call an ambulance. And that's what I did. The delirium part of delirium tremens, it comes and goes in the early stages. So you're not always completely out of your mind. Occasionally you are able to be aware that something is wrong. Eventually, if you leave it untreated, it will tip over into full-blown delirium tremens and you will no longer have any contact with reality. But in these early stages, there are peaks and troughs of lucidity, of liminality. And it's worth just pausing for a moment to talk about what delirium is. Delirium is defined medically as confusion, acute confusion. But what it is in practice to experience is a complete detachment from reality. You're not confused so much as you are interpreting reality incorrectly. It's something a little bit more like psychosis or delusion than it is just confusion. So instead of like looking around the room that you're in and seeing the room, you will interpret the walls to be made of mud and dirt, and you're not sat on your chair or lying on your back in your bed. You're staring up from the bottom of your own grave, and instead of the ceiling you might see the night sky and stars and the moon, and you become convinced that you're being buried alive. It's that kind of thing. It's almost never pleasant. It's never a good interpretation of reality. It's always evil. I saw an old lady on the streets of Brighton once, very, very elderly woman, and she picked up a Pepsi cup and was examining it closely when it appeared to her to burst into flames. And she threw it on the floor in panic and then stamped on it hard enough to break her own leg. It was a very, very grim thing to witness, but that's what delirium tremens is like. It's not confusion, it's more like dementia. And in fact, the very first diagnosis I had when I started to come out of that period of my life was pseudo-dementia, because so many of the symptoms are so similar. I went to the hospital, and once you're there with delirium tremens or withdrawal, the doctors will spend some time trying to figure out the nature of your withdrawal. Is it just alcohol withdrawal, or is it acute alcohol withdrawal syndrome? Or is it alcoholic hallucinosis, or alcoholic psychosis, or delirium tremens? And there's a standardized list, a standardized test for that. It's called CIWA, and that's the Clinical Institute Withdrawal Assessment for Alcohol, the revised edition. And that's pretty standard in the Western world. You will be given a score according to your symptoms, and based on that score, the doctors will be able to prescribe the best level of treatment for you. Now, the amount of time that you're going to be on the ward will vary on a number of things. It depends on the nature of your admission. Were you taken in by force, or did you admit yourself? The severity of your symptoms, the nature and length of your drinking, and it varies greatly. My first ever time being hospitalised with delirium tremens was in the UK, and I was in there for about 6 hours before I was handed off to the custody of my parents. And that's terrible treatment, because delirium tremens is life-threatening, and my parents are not doctors, and they had never experienced it either. Alcohol recovery care is not particularly great anywhere that I've experienced it, and from all of the comments, I am aware that it's bad everywhere. And that time I was sent home from the UK too soon. Things got a lot worse for me very quickly. And the next couple of days were horrible for all of us, my parents and myself. But there have been other times. One time I was taken to a psych ward in Berlin. I was there for 6 days. Another time I was admitted. I spent one night in the hospital, and then I was transferred to some kind of psychiatric hospital out in the forest. I'd been there twice now, and the first time I was there, I was supposed to be there for 28 days, but after 2 days I scaled the wall and I walked the 15 miles back home. The point is that you're going to be in hospital for several days. Even if you're white knuckling it, there is a very good chance that you will end up in hospital anyway, because trying to white knuckle delirium tremens, put it this way, delirium tremens makes you very highly delusional, and it makes you act on those delusions. So even if you decide to stay home and try to rough it out, like tough it out, there is a good chance that delirium tremens will drive you out of your house and into the street, where at some point, hopefully, someone will call the police and you'll end up in hospital anyway. My advice is to suck it up and just go straight to the hospital. In there you'll be given a number of drugs, most likely, probably benzodiazepines, and if you're like me and having serious hallucinations, antipsychotics too. And the more of those you take, the longer you'll have to stay. Because what the doctors don't want is to give you a couple of benzodiazepines and then dismiss you, and you go out that afternoon and you drink another bottle of vodka and you die due to the contraindication of the benzodiazepines and the alcohol. If they don't trust you, they won't let you out. And they don't trust alcoholics, rightly so. Which means that if you present with delirium tremens, they will wait until the benzodiazepines are out of your system before they let you out of their sight. And even if you stabilize relatively quickly, they will be trying to keep you there as long as possible. Because the more treatment that you get, doctors are honest with themselves and each other about this. They know that it's very likely that we're alcoholics, we're going to drink. And they know that if we turn up one day with delirium tremens and alcohol withdrawal, we probably will again. And our chances of recovery are better the longer we're treated. The more you are treated now, the less bad it will be in the future. And even if you stabilize quickly, they will want to keep you for about 28 days. That seems to be the standard on a detox ward. And I've never ever stayed in one that long. I've never even stayed in one more than 6 days, because the very first symptom, the very first condition that you'll feel after the worst of the delirium tremens has faded is hyperarousal. Hyperarousal is the medical name given to the fight or flight reflex. I experienced that incredibly intensely when I'm coming out of delirium tremens. And that's why I've never been able to stay on the ward very long. It's because I always feel a profound urge to flee, to run away. I'm always ready to fight in delirium tremens, on the ward afterwards. I walk around very big and guarded and defensive. But the truth is I'm fighting the instinct to just run away. And sometimes that instinct gets the better of me. And I talk my way off the ward and I go and drink. And I get that fight or flight, that hyperarousal. I get that even if I've been through this process at home, which I've also done. If I'm coming out of delirium tremens at home, I will have the need in my apartment to get out urgently. I'll need to run from the apartment. And as soon as I'm outside and I've caught my breath, I will have the same urge to run back into the apartment. And nothing seems to work to calm that feeling. Whether I'm on sedatives or if I have IVs in my arm, whatever it is, I just have to go. And I'll go at the first opportunity, which is why I've never stayed on a ward more than 6 days. Because that fight or flight reflex lasts a long time for me. And it's a crazy impulse. It doesn't make any sense, because the moment I've escaped the ward, I might walk around a bit, and then I feel so terrible that I'll have to sneak back in. I think I must be one of the very few people who has actually broken into the psych ward. My rationality knows that the hospital is the best place for me to be, but the fear makes me restless. It urges me to keep escaping. And that's a very important factor after delirium tremens, is fear. Fear is a major component of delirium tremens, both during and after. In fact, delirium tremens is commonly known as the night terrors, and that's because they come with an absolutely undescribable, inexplicable sense of terror. The fear of delirium tremens is its defining attribute in my experience. It is a constant state of fear, a constant state of impending death, just an implacable, undirected sense of fear. You can't place where it's coming from, but it is total, it is profound, it is overwhelming. And that continues for a long time after treatment. That fear will be a defining part of your experience for a long time after the hallucinations fade and after the worst is over. You will have made a friend of fear, and as you begin to process all of the trauma and the fear and the crazy hallucinations, that fear will sit with you and you'll remember it. And I've experienced that fear in actually scary places, such as the terrible psych ward in Berlin called Bödelschwing. That ward is a terrifying place, even for the staff, even if you're not a patient, and is a horrible place to be. The majority of the people there are very deeply damaged, often psychotic, or experiencing some kind of psychosis, or a schizophrenic break, or paranoid delusions. Us addicts, us people in withdrawal, we're in the minority. And it's a very scary place. Some of them are violent, some of them are filthy, some have very serious and very obvious psychiatric illnesses, and that the prisons aren't designed to deal with, and that's why they're in a psych ward rather than in the prison. And then there's me, withdrawing from alcohol, terrified of everything, hallucinating, not exactly sure what's real and what isn't. As you come out of delirium tremens, you'll feel for a while like you're waking up from a dream, while the dream is still fresh. You're not quite sure if what you saw was real or not, and that feeling lasts longer than the condition itself. So the feeling of confusion after delirium tremens has faded away lasts longer than the delirium tremens actually did. And you'll question how much of that experience was actually real. For days afterwards, you're coming to terms with the fact that none of what you just experienced was actually real. And that has the side effect of making you suspicious of things that are real. And I'll explain that with an example. So I was in the psychiatric hospital once, and I was out in the courtyard area, making notes, trying to write down my experience of the hallucinations so that I would remember them later. And I was joined by this attractive young German woman who spoke English. She strikes up a conversation with me, and we're sat there talking about goals. What are we going to do in sobriety? And her ambition was to see whales in the wild, not the country, like killer whales, orcas in the wild. And I thought that was a very, very good ambition, something really to aim for. And then she started hitting on me. She wanted to go and have sex in the trees out beyond the courtyard. And I said no. This is before I met my current girlfriend. I said no because I knew that it was too good to be true and therefore wasn't real. And we carried on talking. I'm willing to engage with my own hallucinations. And we chatted and then we said goodbye to each other. I hadn't seen her before. I didn't see her again. And then weeks later, she messaged me on Instagram and she apologised for her behaviour. And she had been real. And then I was really miffed that I'd said no, because I think outdoor psychiatric hospital sex sounds pretty fucking awesome. I missed out on that opportunity. People are having sex on detox wards and in rehabs all the time, happens all the time. And the one time it was offered to me by this attractive young German woman, I said no because I thought I was hallucinating. And the flip side of that, of not believing things to be real, is that people also won't believe you when you tell them things. So in that same hospital, I went for lunch in the cafeteria one day, and while I was there alone, this guy approached me, kind of Mediterranean or Arabic looking, and he sat down and he spoke bad German with a thick accent. We got to talking. He said he wasn't a patient, but he was really interested in my headphones that I was wearing. I put them on the table. He was asking how much they were worth, and I had the distinct impression that he was trying to steal them. So I went back to my ward and I pulled a doctor aside and I told him, and I said, listen, there was a guy in the cafeteria. He's not a patient, he's definitely not a doctor, and I think he was trying to steal my headphones. And the doctor kind of looked me up and down and he said, you were hallucinating, yeah? And it filled me with panic that I might still be hallucinating at that time, because I thought I was over it. And I was so scared that I went outside to catch my breath. I was beginning to have a panic attack, like maybe this isn't over, maybe I've been hallucinating everything. And I went back to the cafeteria and the man was gone, but the doctor was there. He had come to check to see if what I had said was true. He said to me, see, no one here, you are imagining it. And then I grabbed him by the elbow and I said, come with me. And I went up to the cafeteria worker behind the counter and I asked her if she remembered me. And she said, ja, du warst mit einem arabischen Mann zusammen, ja? She said, yes, you were with the Arabic man. And the blood drained out of my doctor's face. And I was so relieved. I was so relieved to have had that corroborated and that I hadn't hallucinated it, that I shouted at him, I fucking told you. And it turns out that man was a contractor. He worked in the grounds, and he did indeed come in at lunchtimes to steal things from the vulnerable people. The point is, you will never trust your perception fully ever again, and neither will anyone else. Anyway, in the immediate aftermath of delirium tremens, one moment you'll feel like you wish you had not survived, and you are a piece of shit who has let everybody down. And then the next moment you'll be all geared up to fix everybody's problems, like you can take on the world. Mostly, it's the depression and the anxiety that you'll experience. Delirium tremens is exhausting, and the alcohol withdrawal already comes with extreme insomnia and crippling anxiety too. And that will continue, unfortunately. So even after the worst is over, and the hallucinations are finished, and the delusions have subsided, you will still just feel the worst that you have ever felt in your entire life. There is grief, and there is deep depression, and abject sadness, and a sense of emptiness. And all of that will be urging you to drink more. All of those sensations will be trying to convince you that your life will be better if you open another bottle. And if you're not doing this in a hospital, you really need to work hard to resist that urge Because if you're drinking through withdrawal, if you're drinking to deal with the consequences of delirium tremens, all that means is that you'll be right back there again. If you drink, the moment you stop drinking, it will all just happen all over again and worse. So just stop right now and get it all out of the way. Just get it over and done with all in one. But let's say you've made it through all of that. You are now out the other side. What happens then? Well, let's talk about trauma for a little while. Delirium tremens is truly and literally a brush with death. It has a higher mortality rate than a heart attack. And somehow, delirium tremens knows how dangerous it is. And it knows that you are close to death. And it knows all of your deepest fears and your darkest traumas, and it will use them against you. I've mentioned this before, but one of my delirium tremens hallucinations involved a dead woman punching her hand through my sternum and squeezing my heart incredibly fast. And in that moment, I think I was genuinely close to a heart attack. Maybe even had one. I'm not sure, because that's the way that delirium tremens operates. Imagine that. Your own mind mocking you as you die. It takes a lot of time to come back from an experience like that. It leaves a footprint. A bit of you is always in delirium tremens. And the trick is to learn to live with it. You will see violence and gore and fear. And even though it's not real, you will experience it as though it is. Your whole body reacts. Your entire central nervous system is convincing you that this experience is real, and that does lasting damage. It is common that you will have PTSD as a result of the things that you witnessed and the experience you had in delirium tremens. Now, I used to drink partially because I had PTSD. And now, instead of having nightmares about the things that caused my initial PTSD, I have nightmares about the things that I saw in delirium tremens. I have to sleep with headphones on because external stimulus while I'm asleep can actually trigger kind of like flashbacks in my sleep. I'm not sure if that's a thing, but that is what I experience. You would think that it's easy to calm yourself down over time by reminding yourself that it wasn't actually real. And that does help to an extent. I would never compare my experience of delirium tremens to the PTSD of someone who has seen combat, for example. While those things that you saw and experienced were not real, your body thought they were, and they need to be treated as though they were real. And that trauma that they cause, it doesn't go away just because the hallucinations have stopped. You are damaged afterwards, mentally and physically too. I'm afraid to say that delirium tremens will do lasting physical damage. It has lasting physical effects on your heart and on your central nervous system and on your brain. And due to the nature of the kindling effect, which is the name of the effect by which every withdrawal that you experience causes every subsequent withdrawal to be far worse, you have put yourself at risk of suffering some pretty serious cognitive decline as a result of delirium tremens. And those are largely irreversible. The damage is already done. And you have lasting neurological problems too. I'm 39, and when I'm typing, I've often forgotten what I was writing halfway through the sentence. I don't remember how it was going to end. And if you tell me something and it's not written down in a message, it's gone forever. That has improved. Over the last year or so of complete sobriety, my memory has improved. My concentration has not. I'm not able to finish anything, ever. And that's a problem for someone who ostensibly runs 2 businesses. But the risk of cognitive damage is real, as is like the fatigue that you will feel, the muscle weakness. Immediately after delirium tremens, you will feel so utterly drained for a long time. And weight loss too. I lost 12 pounds in the week that I was in delirium tremens. I do not recommend it as a diet. In case that sounded tempting to your dumb addict brain, don't do it. Okay, I think I'm finished. I wonder if this will work first time. Let's have a look. Okay. Now, is there anything else I haven't mentioned? Insomnia. Your sleep won't go back to normal for several weeks. Today, in sobriety, sleep is my favourite thing, and I can sleep really well because now, having gone 5 or 6 days without any sleep whatsoever, I truly know the value of a good night's sleep. Also, frankly, you're probably going to be an asshole for a while. You have experienced real trauma. You're going to be anxious and irritable and grumpy and spiky for a while. You might experience post-acute withdrawal syndrome, and that's a whole other thing in its own right that deserves a video to itself in the future. And you might have other health conditions that were overlooked while the doctors were desperately trying to treat the most urgent problem at that moment, which was the delirium tremens. There is a chance you might still have pancreatitis or liver disease or kidney disease to deal with. So once you're out the other side of delirium tremens, make sure you are still in contact with your doctors. Now, I believe that part of the reason why delirium tremens is so traumatizing is because it's so unexpected. People are not aware of the power of alcohol when you stop suddenly. People don't know the power it has to completely ruin your life, even if you survive delirium tremens. Even if you quit alcohol, it's still there. So, if you've experienced it, talk about it. Tell your family, tell your loved ones. Talk to somebody about what you've experienced. Start a YouTube channel. The more information there is out there, the better prepared people can be. And I imagine the better the outcomes will be for everybody. I know that talking about it honestly here has certainly helped me. And that's it. I fixed the lens, talked about delirium tremens. It's time to go and relax. Thanks for watching. And as always, good luck out there.